People have a misconception about banking being equal at every institution. The reality is banks have a very different approach from bank to bank in this space. And it's important to work with an institution that knows the business and has the ability to be flexible to help you get an opportunity finance instead of trying to fit it within a specific rigid product or products.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Orthopreneurs podcast. Today, I've got a guest who's going to help you understand a lot more about finance, right? You remember the old saying, banks are a place that only lend you money when you can afford to do it yourself, right? Well, we're going to disprove that today because I know somebody who's going to teach you a lot about banking behind the scenes and a lot of the things that nobody really is telling you. So please, put your hands together. Let's give a warm Orthopreneurs welcome to Bert Smith. And I'm going to try to give him a fake title because he told me what his title was and I'm going to screw it up. But he's a senior vice president of healthcare financing. Did I do okay?
You nailed it. I think that's exactly how it looks on the business card.
Well,
Thanks,
if it
Dr.
isn't, you
Krieger.
should change the business card starting now. Welcome, Bert, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Krieger.
And I didn't say he's a senior vice president of healthcare financing for Live Oak Bank. So I didn't say that. I need to throw that in there. If you've been to Summit before, you've seen them there. We're going to get into some details and discuss things in a little bit about banking, about fun things like how you can buy a massive piece of land and what have you with no money down. That's a fun conversation. It sounds like a late night infomercial, right? Buy some dental land, no money down. But let's start here, Bert. Just personally, can you take a few moments and just explain to everybody, how did you end up where you are now? How did you end up being the SVP of HCF? I'm going to call it SVP HCF at LB. LOB.
It is a crazy story, Dr. Krieger. This is the only company that I have worked for in my entire professional career. I have been told by my friends, I'm 33, wow. I have been told that does not happen to people my age. So
that's crazy.
You know that they're taking good care of me when I've been here for 10 plus years. So I moved from college in Kentucky to come work for this bank when it was 100 people through a family connection. And the whole idea was different. It was just, instead of having branches and tellers, we're going to just work on small business lending for small business owners and do that. And 10 years later, I am still here and I've been doing healthcare lending for 9 of those 10 years.
Wow. Yeah. So for purposes of our discussion today, you personally, your expertise is dealing only in the healthcare space, correct?
That's right. Dental, orthodontic, dental specialty, medical.
And again, I guess now is as good a time as any to ask. You mentioned dental, orthodontic. It seems really premature to get into this question, but I might as well ask it because we're here and we're talking about it. And we may get back into it a little bit later on. But how do bankers typically view orthodontists versus, say, dentists versus, say, oral surgeons? Or are there buckets you put people into, and dentists are one and specialists are another? Or do specialists, individual types of specialists, actually go in their own buckets?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so let's just back up and start very basic. Banks love dental and dental specialty customers. They have high income earning potential. There are a lot of providers in that space, right? Because you have to go or should go get dental services regularly. There is demand that is not changing. There's a lot of income potential. So dental is a hot business always for banks. Then within that, you have your general practitioners. That's a lot of the pie. And then there are specialties that obviously have even higher income earning potential. So I think it's almost like a subset from a financing perspective when you look at orthodontics, endodontists, oral surgeons, where you say, hey, those are very high income earning practitioners, and they have even higher potential than a general practice might as an industry.
Like we just went into this both feet first, right? Like just boom. I'll recount this story I remember, and I've said it a few times on air. It was probably around 2000. Geez, it was probably 1997.
Yeah.
I think I bought my practice in the summer of 96, was the first practice I owned, July 1st, 1996. 97. And I worked at the remainder of 97. And 98, I owned taxes. And I remember on April 14th, I got a call from my accountant who said, Glenn, great news. You had a great year. You paid down a lot of debt. You made some money. I just did your taxes and you owe $62,500. I remember like it was yesterday. After the pucker in my rear end let loose and my intestines almost fell out, I called my banker, who at the time was C First, if I'm not mistaken. You remember those good old days of C First?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's almost like the SNL days.
it was before. Yeah, it was SNL days, and I called him and said I need $63,000, and he said no problem, come on down. And so I went back down. I remember I got in my car, drove right down to downtown Seattle where I was living, and I signed right there, and a check was dispersed into my account for $63,000, like literally in minutes. And then the whole SNL, not Saturday Night Live, folks, but savings and loan, the whole fiasco went down, and the lending world changed literally overnight. And the concept of a handshake and a smile and a good business record no longer held the weight it does today. Is that the explanation for why so many people get so frustrated when trying to get a loan from banks, and why underwriting is held to certain standards that they must follow now? Right? Because when we went for a loan, my partner, Doug Sean, this is before I met you, but we went
Mm-hmm.
looking to buy a practice, and he gave his package of loan material to like 11 banks, and we could not get a loan. Is that a direct result of the SNL fiasco and what happened, or is there more to the picture?
Yeah, so a few things. You should never, as a practice owner or a potential practice owner, struggle to get most loans. I think that happens in two scenarios. One scenario is you're working with a bank that doesn't know dental or especially doesn't know orthodontic businesses, right? Building out an orthodontic space is more expensive than building out most small business physical spaces. And so
Right.
a bank that doesn't understand dental specialty is going to look at that amount of money you want to borrow with no financial history supporting it and say, this doesn't make any sense. So you got to work with a bank that understands this industry. The other thing that we see occasionally is, bigger banks that work in this space sometimes have really rigid credit criteria where it's like a scorecard lending model. And
Okay.
so you have to fit the credit score, income history, geography. And if you check those boxes, you get a great loan with amazing terms. And if you don't, then you get declined. And that is really frustrating because a large majority of those opportunities that get declined may make a lot of sense, but because it's a bigger institution and a scorecard lending model, there is no ability for them to be rational or think about the scenario.
It was very frustrating for us. And here's the crazy part that I think is a great lesson. I had this conversation with my accountant, of all people, on Saturday night. We were doing a big Orthopreneurs RD meeting here in Dallas, and he was
Mm,
there, and we were talking about money. And one of the things we learned is that my first practice I wanted to buy, we were buying for $325,000. Not expensive by any standards, all in. And the practice, the doctor who was there before me only was there for 1 year. He kind of became
mm,
famous in the Dallas space because he was jumped around from practice to practice to practice. And he built this practice and walked away after 1 year. It had like 30 or 25 active patients. It was very small. So I learned that banks don't view that as a traditional practice sale. It was being viewed as a used equipment sale because there really
right.
were no patients. So you weren't buying an ortho practice, but you weren't building a practice. And I think it was a lesson in futility because the equipment we had was all they were willing to finance because that's all you really had. And it wasn't worth the kind of loan we were looking for. So I learned that had the building been destroyed and we had to rebuild from scratch, getting a loan would have been easy, simple,
Yeah.
right? If the practice had a lot of going patients and accounts receivable, it would have been simple. But because it was a newer practice with no patients and no accounts receivable really of any note, we couldn't get a loan. Does that story make sense? Is what I'm telling you. I'm not saying does it seem to make sense, but does the story I'm telling you, that's like a true story, right? That's the way banks view things, right? And I can't. And if you can explain, and again, it's not accusatory. I just for explanatory purposes, why would they be willing, or why would a bank be willing to finance a ground up construction project or a build within four walls project when you have to buy equipment new, but won't pay for the same practice a year later when it already has patients?
Okay, so I mean, where do I start? First of all, I think that is a great example of why people are frustrated sometimes or don't love banks,
Right. I
because
did
logic.
not like banks, Bert. I
Yeah, right,
I can tell you, I did not like banks because
right.
it made zero sense. But sorry for interrupting. Hey, everybody, tickets for Summit 2025 are on sale now. Take a listen to what some of the attendees from Summit 2024 had to say.
This is one of the most unique, most impactful meetings that you can go to as an orthodontist.
It has everything compared to other meetings. Entertainment, the content in the meeting, the speakers, the food.
I learned a lot. It helps the practice, so it really kind of checks all the boxes.
You hope to get something out of it that is going to pay dividends for years to come.
Definitely return on your investment.
We take back a lot to our office.
You get information that you probably don't get easily at any other meeting.
No, you're totally fine. So that's a classic example of a bank saying, okay, well, we have every product, right? We have a startup product, we have an acquisition product, we have an expansion product. What you just described falls into a little gray area that is not covered by any product. And so you got declined. You should not get declined for an opportunity like that, because if you're working with a bank that understands orthodontic and dental, they're going to say, okay, well, is the equipment worth what they're paying for it? No. But what would the opportunity look like if they had to do this or replicate it from scratch? It would cost probably as much, if not more money, to do the build out and equipment, and it would take more time. And so that should be an opportunity that you get approved for 10 times out of 10 if you're a good applicant. But because it doesn't fit into the product set, you get declined. And so that, again, is where people have a misconception about banking being equal at every institution. The reality is banks have a very different approach from bank to bank in this space. And it's important to work with an institution that knows the business and has the ability to be flexible to help you get an opportunity finance instead of trying to fit it within a specific rigid product or products.
Yeah, it really is interesting to me how that works. And now we can go to how I met you, because how I met you is and this is a great lesson for everybody out there. Doug and I were looking to buy a piece of land and put a building on it. But let's start first, Bert, if you don't mind. If somebody out there is thinking about buying land and putting a building on it, what is the traditional model for how it's financed and how one has to come up with cash, right? Because if you're going to buy a piece of land, that's a little different than the building that's going to go on it, which is a little different than if there's already a building there and you want to do a build out. You want to just go through the traditional way that the banking system in the last 20 years has approached a traditional loan, is what I'm referring to now, for buying a piece of land and a building.
Totally get it. So, what I'd say first is let's talk about it's really important to own the real estate where you practice if it's financially feasible and possible. It is so expensive to build out a space that you are going to practice in, and you're improving someone else's real estate when you do that. You rarely, if ever, get the money out that you invest in the physical build out. So, you should really, for that reason alone, own the real estate if it's possible. What typical banks will look at when you're an existing practice is your historical cash flow, and they will want to give you a loan to buy the land or building, and then another loan to do the build out, and then another loan to do the equipment financing, and what ends up happening is you have multiple loans, they have different terms, they have higher monthly payments, and it becomes very difficult from that bank's credit criteria to make an opportunity to buy real estate or buy land and build make sense. There are specialized banks that understand dental that occasionally will use federal government loan programs like the SBA loan programs to help doctors buy a piece of property, buy a building with little to no money down in some circumstances to start up or expand a practice. And so you can kind of get into real estate ownership based on your projected cash flow and your track record as an associate or producer, and get into real estate ownership sooner than you might if you go through a traditional banking route where they want a significant amount of money down and a lot of great financial history at the practice and multiple loans with shorter terms.
Right. And not just any bank does SBA loans, right? You have to know your way around the paperwork. You've got to know your way around compliance. You've got to know your way around a lot of things. And so
Totally.
that's why banks like Live Oak, where you work,
Yeah.
do a lot of SBA lending, right?
So Live Oak is the largest small business lender in the country by volume. So we feel like we know the product pretty well. What
Yeah.
I'd say is, a lot of times banks, bigger banks especially, have an SBA department. And so they kind of think about using the SBA product as their backup product. So if you come in and apply for a loan, they try to give you a conventional loan. And then if they don't like that profile for whatever reason, then they go use the SBA loan as a backup product. When you experience that dynamic, usually the SBA loan team on that bank lending side is going to kind of be under-resourced or disadvantaged. So you're not going to get the same experience that you would working with an SBA lender that makes it a big part of their business. So that's a really important thing when you're thinking about understanding how to pick a bank and structure a commercial real estate or ground up construction opportunity, is you want to work with a bank that's going to help you take full advantage of the rules of the SBA program.
Which again, so for instance, going back to our original query, I want to buy a piece of land. It's $1 million. I want to go build $1 million building on there, and I want to do a $500,000 build out on that $1 million building, right? None of those numbers are really crazy, although the $1 million building is kind of small. You're not going to find $1 million shell, but let's just say you will, okay? Traditionally, the $1 million land, I need to go and come up with probably at least 30% down, typically, right?
35 or 40 right now if you're just buying raw land.
Okay, so raw land, $1 million. I got to come up with $350,000 to $400,000. For my shell, what do I have to do for the shell typically, traditionally?
So for the shell, the challenge is going to be, again, what's the cost, and then how does it appraise? And so that's another thing we see in dental and orthodontics is a lot of times appraisers compare it to other medical or other office real estate. And so where you'll get tripped up is the bank will say, well, we appraised what the value of your project is going to be, and we think it's worth $1.5 million because we compared it to all these other sales in the market. And then you go look at the sales and you say, well, that's an office space for an accounting firm. That's a primary care doctor doing exam room, build out. So it's not the same as building out a dental or dental specialty space. And so then you end up having to come up with even more money down because the bank doesn't think that your project is worth what it costs to build. And so there again is where SBA financing, when you're working with a bank that will help you maximize the opportunity and the rules of the program, can look at your cash flow and get comfortable with the business's ability to repay the loan and understand why you may want to spend more money to build the building that you're thinking about than is valued on the appraisal. So that's an important thing to think about when you're putting a plan together for a ground up project.
But Your Honor, I ask you to please ask the witness to answer the question.
Okay.
So on the shell, it's $1 million and it appraises out at $1 million. How much do I need to come in typically for that shell? 20%?
You're usually going to have to bring in a little more money if you get a full appraisal value, but you're probably, 35 to 40 on the land. That's probably enough to get you what you need on the project.
Okay.
It's going to be totally appraisal dependent. The challenge is construction lending is typically going to be on a 15-year term. And so this is where term limits start to come into play. If you go a traditional route to try and build a building, you're going to be constrained by how much you have to pay per month when the thing is done.
Right.
And so when you use a 15-year term to do a construction loan, the monthly payments end up being significant, and it starts to really maybe not make sense when you compare it to leasing a space.
Yeah. So now we go this SBA route. How much for the same million and 500? Let's assume it appraises out at the end that the building's
Yep.
worth $3 million when it's all said and done, or 2.5
Sure.
million, right? And I
Sure.
assume we're working with cap costs at that point of the game as well. It's not just a simple, the cash flow. There's a value of a commercial building, but let's assume everything makes sense. At the end
hmm
of the day, how much do I need to come in with, say, at a Live Oak or an SBA lender to do that project?
So first and foremost, what you have to think about is the SBA program allows the lender to determine the appropriate down payment when you are building a building or buying real estate for your practice. So some lenders are going to say, hey, the SBA rules are flexible, but we require 10% down on everything. At a bank like Live Oak, we're typically financing the opportunity to build a piece of or buy a piece of land, build a building, buy a piece of commercial real estate, build it out with less money down than 10%, and oftentimes 100% financing. If you're a stronger applicant with good income and a decent personal financial statement. So that's number one, is you get lower down payments, and anybody or a lot of people in your podcast world could get a SBA loan with a little money down to build a building. You also get a longer term. So an SBA loan term is 25 years. If you put the entire cost of the financing on a longer term, that shrinks your minimum monthly payment. And now borrowing the amount of money that you need to borrow to build the facility that fits your level of service can start to make sense because you can afford it.
So again, nothing comes for free. So I
Right.
guess the question is, why wouldn't I use SBA for everything? I know the answer, but I want to hear
Yeah,
what if somebody has the means to go SBA or traditional loans,
totally.
which way would you go? If you
It
have the
totally,
means.
so it totally depends on your situation. So I'm going to answer the question, I promise.
No, it's
Um,
okay.
the the SBA products are more expensive, right? So there is a guarantee fee that the borrower pays to the federal government for the bank to give them those awesome terms that we just talked about. So the fees vary depending on the size of the project. It's a little convoluted, but loans under $1 million have no SBA fees if you're using the 7A loan program. Loans between $1 and $2 million have fees of about 1% of the total loan amount. And then when you start to borrow over $2 million, the fees become more expensive. You're looking at 2.25 to 2.35% of the total loan amount at that time. So it's a more expensive product. You pay for the flexibility. Um, what I tell people is traditional financing is more expensive up front, but may be an overall lower project cost if you're looking apples to apples. Typically, the people we're working with on the SBA side um, either have built up a great practice or want to start up, and they just haven't had the chance to save a lot of money yet because
Right.
of student loans and young families and whatnot, or they're growing rapidly and they want to save their cash, and they understand that there are very few opportunities to develop real estate without spending a significant amount of personal capital, and so you leverage your practice. You pay more for it if you're looking at the cost of the project, um, but you're developing the real estate with less capital, and you have the flexibility to use that money to do other things. So it totally depends on your priorities and your growth trajectory for your practice.
Yeah, fair enough. Now you mentioned something earlier about associates, right? So you said if
Yeah.
associate has shown a proven track record. So let's say I'm working in someone's office. I want to get out from under working for the man, and I see a
hmm
piece of land or something I want to buy through an SBA loan.
Yep.
I don't have any cash saved. Maybe I have a little bit, but I don't have a ton. I want to go the SBA route, but I've proven that I've done a $2 million practice by myself. That
Yeah.
actually holds weight when it comes to applying for an SBA loan.
Totally. At Live Oak Bank, it does for sure. So, some banks will have rigid requirements. They'll say, hey, we want to see a certain amount of associate experience in terms of time and money. Um, At Live Oak, it's a little more situation dependent. And so really what we want to see is whatever project that you're wanting to pursue, have you done something for a period of months that translates into what you would need to produce to make your practice a success in relation to what you're borrowing to build it? And that's a conversation that we're willing to have with every customer individually. Somebody doing a $2 million production load, we're going to feel pretty comfortable putting them into a lot of different types of projects because they've done the production. The other thing that we love to see or talk to customers about when we do a startup is how are you going to earn money outside the practice in your initial months to ramp up or support the practice until it ramps up. So, we work with people sometimes that say, hey, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to build this practice and I'm going to turn the lights on and it's going to be a success. Well, that could very well happen. It happens to a vast majority of our portfolio clients, but we love startup lending in the orthodontic space because there is the ability to make money outside the practice if it takes a little longer to get your practice that you're starting from scratch to the point where it's cash flow positive or is really successful.
Nice, but it's a beautiful thing that there's an opportunity there for people based on their track record, because there's nothing's more
Totally.
frustrating if you're a young doc who knows where they want to practice, has the opportunity to buy a piece of land, goes into
Yep.
a bank and goes, I want to buy something. Go, great. Even let's assume it's not even buying a piece of land. We're not going to get that extravagant. There is a practice for sale. Now, a practice for sale, typically, do you need to come in with money down on a non-SBA loan for practice for sale? Or if it's cash flowing, usually that's not a problem, correct?
You're exactly right. And so, in my opinion, that type of opportunity is perfect for conventional financing.
Right.
Because you are buying a business that has proven cash flow. And as long as the purchase price is correct and the practice has been run fairly profitably, banks are typically going to understand that opportunity pretty easily and say, okay, here's the monthly payment. He's replacing the seller. She's replacing the seller. Great. That makes a lot of sense. If you can find a practice to buy in this environment, then that's great because, DSO, corporate, it's harder now for a doctor out of school, as I'm sure you've talked about in this podcast before.
I have.
To buy an existing practice. The market looks very different. But if you are one of the lucky ones, in my opinion, you're really not going to have problems getting financing for that opportunity.
Right. But now let's just say an associate says, look, there is a piece of land or there's a building or whatever it might be. Traditional bank, you walk in there and say, hey, I found a piece of land. I want to put a perfect building on there. I'm going to build my own space from scratch. They're going to look and go, great. Here, let's see your tax returns. Right. And that's the beautiful thing about SBA. You are paying it's going to cost you more money. There's no question.
Yes.
Interest rates are about the same typically, Bert, but you're going to pay you're paying your fees. But is the interest rate typically about the same as what a bank would give you?
In terms of looking at the interest rate compared to like a practice acquisition, it's usually going to be a little higher.
No. Dollars for dollars. I'm just saying SBA loan, and I'm trying to get through this one fast. I'm looking to get a loan from an SBA just to build the building versus conventional loan, same build, same everything. Am I paying more for the interest rate itself for one versus the other?
The interest rates are typically going to be a little higher in SBA lending. Okay. Again, that is totally bank specific. So the thing to understand is that with some SBA loan products, the bank sets the interest rate. So I hear all the time people come in and they go, well, what are lending rates for SBA? There are specific SBA products where you have to put money down, where part of the financing ends up being funded directly by the SBA. And that interest rate is published every month. But otherwise, it depends on the bank.
But going back to the initial question, on average, the rates will be a little bit higher with an SBA loan than they would, and you're going to pay for the fee. So my point in all of this, the story I'm getting at, is a doc sees a practice he wants to buy. He's got a piece of land available. He's got a building that he wants to build or she wants to build. And they go into a conventional place. If they've got the money and they got the tax returns and they got the cash flow and they got a pro forma and they got the right day of the month and the moon is shining properly and underwriting is in a good mood, they'll get the loan. But with SBA, they come in and go, hey, I just ran this $2 million practice by myself. Here's the demographic studies on the space. I think we're going to do really, really good. Why would someone ever let's assume they're willing to pay, let's just call it a $2 million project. So they're going to pay about $45,000 in fees. They're going to pay a slightly higher interest rate slightly higher. But
Yep.
why would that person ever get denied for a loan at that point? What are some of the reasons why someone would be
Well,
denied?
again, it is totally dependent on the bank. That is a profile that would never get declined at Live Oak. And I
That's my
think a bank
question.
that understands the orthodontic industry is going to approve that doctor. What we look for is track record. Um, have you put a really good plan together? So we actually read your business plan and projections. It doesn't have to be a 40-page novel, but we care about how you're going to differentiate yourself from the competition, your thought process. We meet just about every customer that we work with in person before we close. I flew out to meet you in Dallas, right?
Yes, you did. And by the way, people, just want to tell you, there's that very, very, very small possibility you could fly on the Live Oak private jet. Now, you might say private jet. I knew the bankers are making all that money, but the truth of the matter is, if I ask you to go walk into your local Live Oak Bank branch, you might have a difficult time with it because at Live Oak, they'd much rather fly out to meet you than have you go into some fancy multi-million-dollar branch with 50 of them all over the nation. So they actually have a plane so they can fly to see you on a whim's notice, right? So
We believe that you should meet every customer in person. Like that is a guiding principle of the bank. We also believe that bank branches are going to become obsolete. Um, when was the last time you went into a bank branch?
have they not become obsolete already?
Well, it depends on who you ask. But when was the last time you went to a bank branch? Were you happy that you had to be there? Um, we want to be in front of all of our customers. We're the largest small business lender in the country by some metrics. And so to do that, you need to be able to go see people. And so that's been a really interesting part about this job and this business is that we are using private aircraft at times to go extend our reach and get out in front of our customers more. It is significantly less expensive, in my personal opinion, to do that than have branches. And it just allows us to take better care of the customer.
So yeah, what else have I missed here, Bert? We've covered a lot when it comes to banking. I guess the only thing I've really missed here is if somebody wants to learn more about Live Oak and wants to work with you, and again, just find out more about a specific project or products or anything like that, how do they get a hold of you? What's the right way to get you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I can share the contact information with you after the podcast, or I don't know how you do that, but what I'd say is the first thing to keep in mind is we are not commission salespeople at Live Oak. I think that's the first thing I told you. I don't remember if you reacted to that or not, but we are not commission salespeople. So we understand that we are specialists here and we have a product market fit in the practice finance space. If we feel like there is a better banking option out there than what we can give you for whatever you're trying to do, start up, acquire, we can help connect you to the people that we think would help. So we're an educator first. You can reach out to me anytime at bert.smith@liveoak.bank, or find me on Live Oak's website, and our cell phone numbers are all posted there. So
Well,
we're happy to help. Um, Anyone that is wanting to start up or expand a practice can own real estate, just about. The question is, how much can you afford and does it make sense for you? And we're happy to consult and help you figure that out and answer that question.
well, Bert, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for you being here today. Thank you for helping everybody get the loans that they need and helping them put some clarity into the situation. And just look forward to seeing you at a Orthopreneurs Summit at some point in the future.
Thanks, Dr. Krieger. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.